In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Have you ever heard this rhyme before? Do you know who Christopher Columbus is?
I remember him.
Today's past moment from history is about the voyage of Christopher Columbus to the Americas. There's so much more to the story than him just boarding a few ships and coming to America.
I'm excited to learn more.
Well, this past moment has lots to discover. Get it?
Ha ha ha.
Before we start to talk about this past moment, let's just lay a few facts out there about this past moment and the famous explorer Christopher Columbus.
Check this out.
Fact number 1. Christopher Columbus is a really famous explorer, and he has sometimes been credited with quote-unquote discovering America. He, in fact, did not discover the Americas. Discovering means finding something before no one has ever found it. Millions of people already lived in the Americas before he arrived.
My mind is blown.
Fact number 2. When we talk about discovery, a lot of times people are talking about the first Europeans to discover something. But guess what? Christopher Columbus wasn't even the first European to discover the Americas, according to that definition. Recent evidence has proved that the Vikings traveled to and settled in parts of North America as early as the year 1000, about 500 years earlier than Columbus. Keep in mind, we're in the year 2025, so when Columbus traveled to the Americas, that was 500 years before right now.
That was a long time ago.
Fact number 3. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, America was probably truly discovered, meaning the first humans to ever encounter it, by hunters from Asia a really long time ago. Historians believe they walked to Alaska from a place called Siberia on a land bridge during the last ice age. Or they could have also possibly come by boat and continued southward along the coastline. In either case, these people, the true discoverers, arrived between 13,000 to 35,000 years ago. So long ago that their descendants are considered to be the continent's indigenous people, Native Americans. Remember, Columbus only came to the Americas about 500 years ago. So the original discoverers of America, or the indigenous people that made that discovery, were many thousands of years before him.
I learned something new today.
I'm glad. And we're going to learn more about the voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492 and the impact that this past moment from history had on the world around it. Should we dive in?
Let's get started.
All right.
Welcome to Check This Out, podcast for kids.
And their grown-ups, where we explore people, places, ponderings, and past moments from history that shape the world around us. My name is Amy Contreras.
And I'm Cece.
As you all know, we're talking about the past moment today of the voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492. I know a lot of kids learn about Christopher Columbus in school. Cece, should we see what our listeners already know about Columbus and the 1492 voyage?
Let's see what you got.
Listeners, do you know the names of the ship that Christopher Columbus sailed to the Americas on? Hopefully you said the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Those were the 3 ships that Christopher Columbus sailed across the sea to the Americas on.
Question number 2.
Do you know what country Christopher Columbus sailed to the Americas from? Was it A, Italy, B, Portugal, or C, Spain? If you said Spain, great job, you're right.
Question number 3.
Do you know why Columbus set out on his journey?
I got nothing.
That's okay. Christopher Columbus was trying to find a westward route to the East Indies. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but for a long time, people had to travel south around Africa to get to Asia from places like Spain or Italy. It took a long time to travel this way, so people like Christopher Columbus were looking for a quicker way to the East Indies and Asia for trade purposes.
Question number 4.
Where was Christopher Columbus born? A, Germany, B, Italy, or C, Spain? Although he sailed to the Americas on behalf of Spain, Christopher Columbus was actually born in Italy. And here's one last question, and then we'll give you all the details of this past moment of the voyage of 1492. Do you know how many times Columbus sailed to the Americas in his lifetime? Was it A, 3 times, B, 4 times, or C, 6 times? If you said B, 4 times, great guess.
Good job!
And don't worry if you didn't know all those facts. After our episode today, you're going to know all the key information about the voyage of 1492.
Let's start at the beginning.
Good idea, Cece. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy in 1451. Around 1476, he moved to Portugal and settled in the city of Lisbon. While he was living in Portugal, Columbus went to school and got educated, and he became a sailor. He sailed on several voyages, and he ultimately married a Portuguese lady of the lower nobility, and he ultimately became a successful ship captain.
I'm with you.
As Columbus grew up, he heard people talking about how long it took to get to the East Indies in Asia by the boat route around Africa. He even took this trip a couple of times as a sailor. He became determined to find a more direct water route west from Europe to Asia.
Why, Mama?
Well, Cece, back in the 1400s when Columbus was alive, it was a lot harder for people to do something called trading because they didn't have airplanes. Trading is when people or countries exchange goods. And back when Columbus was alive, things like spices or silks or gold were the most precious things on earth that they could get. And these were really prevalent in the East Indies and Asia. In fact, spices like cinnamon and pepper were worth even more than gold when Columbus was alive.
I had no idea.
The idea of getting to Asia by sailing west instead of having to go south around Africa wasn't new, but lots of experts back when Columbus was alive agreed that the voyage would be really long and difficult.
Who else was involved?
Well, once Columbus made his plan, he offered the plan to sail west to reach the East Indies and Asia to King John II of Portugal in 1484, but the king rejected it in favor of the route that the Portuguese had already established around the tip of South Africa.
That's too bad.
Yeah, Columbus didn't have an easy time getting to his first voyage. He needed a king and queen to sponsor his trip.
What does that word mean?
Sponsor something means pay for it, because getting a bunch of ships, stocking them with people and supplies was really expensive. So he needed someone to sponsor or pay for the voyage.
I get that.
Before Spain eventually agreed to sponsor the voyage, he had asked the king and queen in England, France, and Portugal.
Man, oh man.
Once the king and queen of Spain said yes, Columbus and his crew finally got together and left Spain on August 3rd in 1492 with 3 ships. We already talked about the names of these ships, but just in case you missed it, the 3 ships were the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Do you want to guess about how many men traveled with the ships?
I don't know.
It was 90. On October 12th, Columbus and his crew found land. Now, do you think they found Asia and the East Indies?
No.
You're right, Cece. Columbus and his crew thought they found the East Indies, but they actually landed somewhere in the Bahamas. We think on the island of San Salvador. But don't try telling Columbus that. He thought he had reached the outer islands of the East Indies when they found land.
That's funny.
In fact, Columbus was so convinced he found the East Indies that when Columbus met the indigenous people who lived on these islands, he called them Indians.
That makes a lot of sense.
After Columbus and his crew arrived, they continued to explore the quote-unquote New World. For months, Columbus sailed from island to island in the Caribbean, looking for pearls, precious stones, gold, silver, spices, and any other objects or merchandise that he had promised he would bring back for the King and Queen of Spain since they had sponsored his trip.
Check this out.
Columbus never set foot in what we know today as the United States. A lot of people think he did because for a long time our country celebrated Columbus Day. And a lot of things are named in honor of Columbus, like, for example, the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. But in fact, Columbus spent the majority of his time in South and Central America and on the islands of the Bahamas and the Caribbean.
That's a big deal.
Columbus spent a few months on the islands exploring, and in January of 1943, he left around 20 to 30 men behind in a settlement on an island he named Hispaniola.
Check this out.
Today, Hispaniola is an island we know as two countries, which are Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But after Columbus left his men behind at the settlement, he went back to Spain to share the news he had found the East Indies with the King and Queen of Spain. Columbus was celebrated widely in Spain, which we'll talk about in a minute. But over time, his legacy has been updated to include the horrible impact he had on the indigenous people who lived in the Americas. Columbus's crew, and others that followed, brought disease, violence, and slavery to the people who lived in these places before they arrived.
That is not okay.
When Columbus landed on Hispaniola, the island that contains Haiti and the Dominican Republic today, about 250,000 natives from the Taino tribe lived there. 60 years after Columbus and his crew landed, do you want to guess how many of the indigenous Taino people were still left? A, a few hundred. B, about half, around 100,000. Or C, all of them? The answer is A. Only a few hundred were left. They died in mass amounts due to disease and violence from Columbus and his crew.
I can't believe that happened.
Columbus believed the native people on the lands he sailed to should be enslaved. He wrote about this a lot in his journals. He thought because they lived a different kind of life and because they were kind and welcoming, that they were very ready to submit to the Spanish. He mistreated them, and he even stole and kidnapped indigenous people to take back to Spain with him.
History can be complicated.
Sadly, Columbus's first voyage in 1492 was just the beginning of his mistreatment of the local people in all the places he sailed to. Christopher Columbus's return to Spain in March of 1493 marked a big moment in world history. Europeans at the time of Columbus didn't know the Vikings had found the Americas hundreds of years before. His first successful voyage in 1492 led to a major period of European exploration. Columbus ultimately returned to Spain with native artifacts and kidnapped individuals, which he presented to the Spanish court. His arrival was celebrated in Spain, and it ignited a big interest across Europe for further exploration of the West.
I want to check out more about that.
And in the 20th and 21st centuries, Columbus's legacy was updated from that of explorer, period, to really reflect both his exploration and skills as a sailor, but also to highlight the evils of colonialism and enslavement. Columbus became linked to the killing of indigenous populations at the hands of Europeans, because that was a big part of what happened.
Here's a fun fact.
In the 2020s, many communities in the United States actually renamed and reclaimed Columbus Day, which is October 11th, as Indigenous Peoples Day. Both days are traditionally celebrated on the second Monday of October. Now, we know Columbus made 4 voyages to America, not just the one in 1492. And he explored a large area of the Caribbean and part of the northern coast of South America. And do you know the first thing he asked about everywhere he went in the New World?
No.
At every island, the first thing he inquired about was gold, because his job was to bring riches back to the King and Queen of Spain. Columbus's voyage of 1492 revealed 2 continents that were totally new to Europeans and initiated a period of rapid colonization and exploration, but also of exploitation or taking advantage of people in the Americas. This time of exploration meant people and animals were moving across cultures and across the ocean. It also meant food was moving across cultures in the ocean. Old World wheat from Europe became an American food staple, and things like African coffee and Asian sugarcane became major crops for Latin America. And then American foods like corn, tomatoes, and potatoes were introduced into European diets. But those weren't the only things that moved across the cultures in the ocean. Unfortunately, disease also moved across the ocean and had a really devastating impact on the native people in the Americas. It's important that we talk about Christopher Columbus. He's remembered as being a daring and path-breaking explorer who sailed in 1492. He introduced Europe to the New World, but his actions also unleashed a really harsh ripple effect on the Americas and the people who lived here that would eventually devastate the indigenous populations. So we have to look at Christopher Columbus as a whole, not just as the guy who sailed in 1492 across the ocean blue. Now, before we let you go,
we wrote you a poem.
Let's do it. In 1492, across the sea that was so blue, sailed Columbus and his crew, searching for lands anew. He thought he'd find a shortcut east to Asia's spices and treasures at least. But what he found on his journey was land that would change history. He landed on islands in the Caribbean's glow, called them Indies because he didn't know. The native people already there lived their lives without despair. But Columbus's arrival marked a change, bringing sorrow, sickness, and pain. So next time you hear that famous rhyme, think of the people and the passage of time. All the stories and truths held within of explorers and the world's vast spin. Thanks for listening to another episode of Check This Out. Here at the Check This Out podcast, we know there's a ton of information and it can be overwhelming to find accurate information online. This podcast is a tool for you to help you do something called citing your sources. As you get older and do projects for school, you'll learn that certain types of websites or information aren't verified or have evidence and documentation to back them up. On Check This Out, we use verified sources to build the stories you hear about. Verified sources are materials or information that have been confirmed for accuracy and credibility through an evaluation process. Our sources for this week's episode are History.com, Encyclopedia Britannica, PBS, National Geographic, the Smithsonian, and EBSCO. Join us next week for another episode featuring a past moment from history.
Thanks for listening. See you next episode. Don't forget to subscribe.